We hope you all enjoyed. Please join me in welcoming co-director and producer Giselle Bailey, author and activist Adafe Okporo, and Bevy Smith.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. As you know, as you just witnessed, it's a really great film, a very important film. How many of you guys out here knew that Nigeria had such strict laws regarding the LGBTQ community? Yeah, I mean, I know that it's largely frowned on the continent, but I had no idea that imprisonment, you know, it was such a big part of the restrictions and marginalizing people. So, Giselle, the first question will go to you, my love. How did you find out about the Legends of the Underground, and what attracted you to this project?
Well, several of the legends of the underground that you see in the film are really part of my chosen family in my chosen home of New York. It offered me a home like it did many of them. Actually, my co-director, Neka, met Deji just at a restaurant in Harlem, in an African restaurant in Harlem. And then she started spending more time in the community. And I met her while working on My House, which was about the Vogue and ballroom scene in New York City. And from there, we started to explore more people in New York who were seeking asylum, who were nonconformists, who were queer, who were gay in the space. And that led us back to Nigeria as well.
Yes. And speaking, going back to Nigeria, Dafe, let's talk a little bit about you being a refugee and what this film means to you.
Thank you very much, baby. This film sometimes have different interpretation for me whenever I see it. Just listening to the soundtrack before I came on stage, I think about the ballroom scene. So before I came to the US, one of the last parties I had was with Deji, and that is what I think about when I think about this film. It's like Nigeria has never been covered, and the queer community is lacking representation. And for me, it makes me feel like it is possible that what I was fighting for before I came to this country is possible, and there are people who can make it possible.
Yes, and you know, in the back we were talking about one of the people who are doing the work, making change possible, the flamboyant and fabulous James Brown. And he was such a captivating character. How did you get him to open up to you? Because as we know from watching the film, it's not easy being James Brown in Nigeria.
You know what? I can't even take credit for James Brown being open. That is what James does. That's who James is. He's incredibly brave. He is 100% authentic at all times. And he felt that he wanted to share his story in a way where he could take more time and be more intimate with what he was discussing. And I think that we were able to form a bond over several conversations, and I think he just felt, I think he saw something in us and just felt ready to share, to be honest.
Yes. And what has been your experience with James Brown? Because I know that, you know, you don't live in Nigeria, you now live in Harlem adjacent, the Upper West Side. But, you know, I'm sure when you found out about him, did you find out about him from his viral sensation, his video?
Yeah, that's when I found out about him. But I thought that the video was like a one-shot thing. Mm-hmm. So during the course of the documentary, I worked with refugees, and I was put in a position that I had to help James Brown come here. But James Brown was honest with me. It was like, I really want to leave Nigeria if my life is in danger, but I feel like I could navigate the tension surrounding my work. And I feel like if everybody leaves, who's going to fight for us? So I'm going to stay here and continue to fight until it's no longer possible to do so. And I am James Brown. I've become very good friends. Like, he calls me senior. It means like senior. And one day he told me like, I want to be a gay person like you. And I'm like, I want to be like you. but I don't have the courage to be like you. That's why I'm like myself, because I grew up in a generation whereby I have to confine to the traditions that were set in front of me. I was a pastor growing up, and expressing my gender was not a part of the agenda. So you admire my work, I admire your work, so let's just be ourselves.
Yeah. And you know, when I was watching the film, and there was that part where there was the support group happening, and people were kind of blaming James Brown for the attention or the police harassment because of how flamboyant he was. How did that affect James, to your knowledge, Giselle? And do you think that for a moment, did he ever feel like, maybe I should tone it down? We see the triumphant end where he is fully himself, but was there ever a moment that you know of where he kind of felt like maybe just tone it down a bit?
I think underneath everybody's, larger exterior persona, there's always some self-doubt.
Yeah.
There's lots of hurt. But I don't think he ever truly, let's put it this way, I don't think he could ever truly be anything but authentic and who he is. And I think because of that, he's made that his battle cry, because there's nowhere for him to hide, you know?
Yeah. Michael, the activist, I was so impressed by the fact that, he's now a global activist, and he's using his voice to really tell these stories. And these are not stories that we often see in mainstream media. But he actually is not here today because he's in Europe somewhere, yes, doing some great work. How important was it for Michael to be a part of this, because he's one of the old school activists?
When I came into this work, Michael was I've been in the US for quite some time. So, like, when a new Nigerian come to the US, like Michael and the rest, they welcome us to New York, like, hey, welcome to New York, and what have you. So I think that there's also a generational gap between Michael and me, even though it's a few years apart. And like the way there's a generational gap between me and James. So like Michael's generation, they were doing the work and no visibility. Yeah. Like, let's do it and people don't see how we get it done. But if not for somebody like Michael, the HIV work in Nigeria, maybe there wouldn't have been me or James Brown. Because there was a time in Nigeria where there was a lot of stigma about HIV and AIDS. Michael was among the first people that openly spoke about it. And that gave people the semblance of less stigma towards talking about a thing like HIV. So even when it came to the US, I later began to see what he was saying when I just came to the US. It was like, I give you time, there will be some form of burnout. Because there's no systemic way of helping new Nigerians that come. So the burden rests on people that are old-timers, because they are the keeper of the knowledge. Yeah. So when a new person comes, they have to teach a new person and teach a new person. And I see that there's a kind of burnout culture that happens because they are not being paid to do things like that. So Michael is like a father to some younger Nigerians that are here. And despite that, he continues to withhold some of the negative things that are said about him as an activist. To be an activist is not an easy language in today's world. But in Michael's time, it was frowned upon every single way. But he continued to still push the narrative about what is possible. And that is why people like us could have a narrative. Because I know if you go to the media, you see things that are written about me or some other activists, but they opened the door for us to be able to walk in.
I love that you brought up that point that he opened the door, because when he went back to tears and he was talking to all the young Nigerian diverse folks in the room, there seemed to be some tension because people were kind of giving him a bit of shade about not being there, and you left, and it's been a long time and all of that. How did Michael feel about that? Because it was a bit of a pushback. Like you could see it in his face, like he was kind of taken aback, but he was trying to understand what they're paying. He was trying to be respectful of that.
I think he expected it to some degree, but I think it still feels heartbreaking. Because the thing is, when you leave your home, I left mine for very different reasons, and I had much more of a choice than he did, but I know that that feeling is heartbreaking. Yeah. You lose everything that you knew, and you're starting again. And I think there's always a dream of returning home being a homecoming. Mm-hmm. But you've changed, you've evolved, and so has that place. So coming back together, you have to find a way to form a new relationship. And I think that growing pains always take some time. But I think ultimately he was able to do that, to find a different relationship. And I think ultimately he was able to help a lot of people and inspire a lot of people as he was going on about that journey.
Yeah. One of the people that welcomed him home with open arms was ID, who we saw actually passed away. And it was, you know, when I read that on the screen, I was just like so devastated, because you could tell that, you know, he felt very much like the mother or the father, you know, and that he was just such an amazing caregiver. So let's talk a little bit about the legacy that ID leaves behind, even though he's no longer with us.
I think that this is one of the most difficult things for me to talk about, because I knew ID, we worked together in the same office, and when I just came to Abuja, I was very bush and masculine in terms of my mentality, not in my appearance. And ID came to my desk and like, hello, ma'am, I want you to help me do something, miss, or any like feminine pronouns, right. Or like, ma'am, I'm like, stop it. You're like, calm down, you're new here. When I ID you, you will change.
I love that.
He used that language. When I ID you, you change. Then as time progressed, he tried to teach me catwalk. I'm like, I'm not into all this. But significantly, one thing about ID that a lot of people do not know is that the way I talk about Michael opening the door in New York, ID opened the door in Abuja. So before we knew that there was Abuja, ID was there.
Yeah.
So when you come to Abuja, you are coming for two reasons. One, your family chased you out of the house. Or two, you're coming to hustle in a city. And imagine you left Kentucky and you come to New York. What do? Ideas like Marsha P. Johnson, come to my house, come and stay with me. And that is how ID welcomed a lot of people. He was very resourceful, and it was like an educator in the community. So that motherly instinct from ID, I think, is passed on to Michael. Deji is a son of ID in Nigeria. I remember the last party I had in July 2016. I wanted to dance off with ID. I was like, calm down. I'll bring my son. Deji, come. So it's like, if I remember him, I think about, if not for him, what would have happened to a lot of younger Nigerian queer people.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. And you know, he does live on through those memories, but also now through this beautiful film. You're making a lot of stars. One of the people that really captivated me was Demrele. I mean, Demrele is like an explosion. I mean, there is no... Tell me about Demrele, because he's one of the elites. And so just explain to us a little bit more about that concept of the elite, and how is someone like Demrele, who is very gender nonconforming in appearance, how does he get to be a part of the elite or even stay in that realm? Because I wouldn't think that that's traditionally embraced by the elite.
No, Demrele is... yeah, an explosion, a shooting star.
Yeah.
I don't even know. I think that he is one of those people who broke the door down, and I think just some of his charisma and wit has allowed him the grace of a larger audience. And because of him, I think he stroked the imagination of a younger generation to be able to dream bigger, wilder than anyone has before. And I know he's been doing that in Nigeria, but also in other places in Africa. Do you have more to say about the elites in general?
I think too that because I'm an openly gay person, I sometimes have a disagreement with the idea of like an elite in the community, because like there's so many people who do not have the privilege and status and they cannot be able to get the privileges the elites get. But in spite of that, they really inspire people like James Brown to be who they are. There's so many people in the pockets of society who don't want to hear about the stories of people that are persecuted, but they want to see like they relay who resists, who like, I'm a star.
Right.
There's nothing you can say to me, audit. Like, it's like so full of life that makes people like, I want to be as expressive as Denrele. So I think there's an ambivalence I feel towards the elite status, but I also know that if things like that don't occur in society, a younger generation might not find the courage to be themselves. So it's a dual.
So are elites a part of the straight community? No, so elites is elite within the within the diverse space.
So in Nigeria, queerness does not have a definition because the word queer means non-conformist. Denrele is more androgynous in the way he dresses, doesn't dress as a man or a woman. It's more expressive. Elites are quote-unquote people who have status, influence in the society. And that shields them from kind of like persecution an everyday Nigerian would face, because you love them, you adore them, they have money, they can, they really can be in a flight to New York tomorrow morning if he wants to. So an elite is a status you have in the society. It doesn't matter if you're straight or like gay or gender non-conforming.
Something that I really thought was important that you touched on in the film was the fact that androgyny is African. It's Nigerian. And as we all know, there are so many tropes around that, homosexuality or, queerness is a creation of the European culture. And that before they came and colonized Africa, there were no such thing as gay people. And so I thought it was really important that you touched on that. So let's talk a little bit about the person that you showed in the film, and also do the people that you worked with in the film, are they aware of that?
Yeah, we actually found out about Area Scatter, that's the person that you see, through some of the people in the film. One of those people was Papa, who's the designer, and he's very interested in making sure that we document all of the artists, all the androgyny, everything that's coming out of the community, because if we do, then the next generation will know that they belong, they come from somewhere.
Yes.
And I think that's also a message not just for Nigeria or Nigerians, but for African Americans as well. That, and especially when you look in the spirituality, tribal customs, all kinds of things, there is androgyny, there is diversity. We have a very rich culture that we're coming from, and it should be beyond acknowledged, celebrated.
Yeah.
I also want to point out, when we're discussing this morning, you said something very important. You said that what does our ancestors want from us? That our ancestors' wildest dream is for us to tell their stories. And when she said it, we ended our breakfast meeting and we went our different ways. But I've been thinking about that all throughout. I'm like, how can I honor the people that came before me? And by talking about Michael and Deji and people that come before me, is giving an opportunity to a younger generation to know that yes. There's Instagram, there's platforms that is making you famous and out there, but there were people before you that died for you, that sacrificed for you to be here. And making sure that their stories lived on is our responsibility.
Amen. And the House of Allure is carrying on that mantle. You know, we were talking about, I didn't realize that one of the songs that they sing is actually,
Yes, Never Never is Mr. Michael, the father of the House of Allure. It's his song that he wrote and then recorded with the guys from the Safe House.
yeah. And so they're really more of a just, they're even more than just like a ballroom house of what we think of in America. They're really very much like an arts collective of sorts, yes?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say, I think that's a really beautiful way to put it. I think it's both things. It's an arts collective, it's a space to express and a way to survive, being able to express authentically, but it's also very much a family.
Yeah.
And maybe that first and foremost to anything else. And I think everybody wants the kind of family that embraces you, who you really are, not who they want you to be. And so when we went there and knowing that that exists, and that's a place like we couldn't even show any of the perimeter or exterior. We had to hide our cameras when we were going in, tried to go in and in a staggered way so people weren't tracking and knowing where this space is, because those people are in danger every single day.
Yeah. You know, I want to talk a little bit about that, a little bit more about how it was potentially dangerous filming there as well, and in Nigeria in general. And as we talked about backstage, the catwalk scene with ID, and I was like, oh, it's so great that they were able to do this at a stadium. And you're like, girl, we got that shut. It was shut down.
Yes, that was, all the footage that we showed is the footage that we have, because there were several different issues with that. One, it was just the nature of that particular space. There were area boys there. It was hot because we were the
area boys. Is that like the local like gang
How would you
members?
describe area boys?
I
Like,
think they're like vigilantes that don't use weapons. They own the land. It's like
Yeah.
the owners of the land.
Yes. So like when you're like so when people film in South Central LA, you can't just film there. Even if you're a big studio, you have to get permission from the block.
exactly.
Okay.
And then if you're getting that attention, and then on top of it, there's like men catwalking there and different things like that, it just becomes dicey. The whole thing, though, was certainly dangerous, meaning that every single person who was there or participated in it was taking a risk. We were queer women coming into a country where it's illegal to be gay. It's illegal to gather as gay people. So by extension, the whole thing was something that was a huge risk. And I say that because I think we really tried our best to make sure the film had a lot of hope and to really capture the joy that exists despite the fear and the risks. But I think it's also important that people remember this is what people are doing in spite of their fears and the risk, you know? So I just want to make that sure everyone remembers that.
Yeah. When you see the opening kind of parts of the film where they're showing the men being arrested and harassed, take off your head, you know, meaning their wigs, or, you know, having to take off their bra, and I mean, just like being lined up and embarrassed in that kind of way. It was just really heart-wrenching. And let's talk about the fact that they lived under this fear of going to jail for 14 years. For how many years did that trial go on? What was it, 2 years?
3 years.
Almost 3 years.
Almost 3 years.
Yeah. And what was that like living under the specter of like, if this goes wrong, I could be in jail for 14 years. And, you know, as James said, you know, he didn't get caught doing it, you know, but still, in all, they could still have imprisoned them all, 57 people, for 14 years.
I would say this, though. I left Nigeria because of the law. And like I said in the film, like none of us is free until all of us are free is like a mantra. That equality and love is not meant for only one set of people. It should be for everybody. But even me, as a refugee in the US and a gay man, I think that within the African American community, the way it exists in Nigeria, it kind of exists here. In the black community, I'm African. In the African community, I'm gay. In the gay community, I'm a refugee. That is how James Brown is in Nigeria. Within the Nigerian community is gender non-conforming. Within the gender non-conforming community is too much, and it's this, and it's that. So it's living with the tension of that personality, along with the fear of potentially going to jail for 14 years imprisonment. If this is what is facing in the outside world, imagine what a personality like James Brown would face in a jail.
Oh, yes.
It would be hell. So I think that there's anxiety at that point to let me leave the country before it blows out. But being able to go through that process without psychiatric help like a therapist, there's no mental health services in Nigeria. There's no support group for people who are pushed away from their family and friends. So it's a tough country to live in, both economically, health-wise, and otherwise, compounded with the fact that you're fighting against the federal government, the most powerful force in the entire country. Yeah. So I just put that together. The maths is just unbearable for him.
And then we touched a little bit on HIV and AIDS, but that's also something that they have to be fearful of because they're marginalized. And oftentimes, a way to support yourself is through sex work. Michael talked about that. He was living from pillar to post. He had to do what he had to do to survive, and through that, he believes that he contracted HIV. So have things gotten better on that forefront, like through programs like Tears or through House of Allure? Have people found more of a refuge, and are we seeing less of that kind of forced sex work?
Sex work should be legal in every part of the world. So there are three ways people respond to stigma. One is, my body is not worthy to be preserved, so I will have sex with anybody I can. Two, nobody's accepting me, so I'm going to hide. So they'll be in the church, don't let anybody know I'm gay. Three is, I'm going to fight, because either I die silent or I die fighting. When I was in Nigeria, there was a program by USAID called 90-90-90. 90% of the population should be tested. 90% of people who are positive should be on drug. 90% viral load suppression. And last year, USAID announced their targets. Michael is part of these meetings in Africa. And they increased it to 95. That means a large percentage of the population has been found, they have been tested, they are on drugs, there's viral suppression. In 2016, the rate of HIV transmission among gay men in Nigeria, prevalence rate was 29.1%.
My Lord.
Now it's 13%.
Wow.
That means there's a reduce of incident rate and prevalence of HIV among the community because more people are aware about condoms, lubricants, HIV testing, and things like that. That supports.
And I do want to say as well, just like in the ballroom scene here, I had been told that a lot of the underground parties were also a place to get education about HIV and to get testing and things like that. And I think, you know, when those parties are suppressed, it also suppresses the community's ability to take care of itself. So there's another
support. Yeah, certainly. Speaking of support, Mr. Ideal, I want to go to that pageant, don't you? I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't know. I mean, even if it's just to go and gawk, I just want to go to Mr. Ideal. So talk to me a little bit about that pageant, and I know it was like, it's not about being gay or straight, it's just kind of, you want to be in a pageant, yes?
Okay, yes. So Mr. Ideal was meant to be a point of difference, meaning that it's about the status quo, normal-based Nigerian ideals of masculinity. And what Yomi is doing, Yomi is as you saw, a lawyer and a dancer, but also the creative director of Mr. Ideal. And he's the one who's bossing everybody around and getting everybody's moves together. And what he wanted to do was challenge that space. So he was a disruptor in that space. He came with his heels and he danced. And I was surprised by the reaction. I think people didn't quite know what to do, but it wasn't a complete no either. It wasn't an L. And I think just in that, it's a huge success.
Yeah. Watching Nomi kind of reminded me of Dimberlay in that way that, you know, someone so captivating that, you know, fabulosity will not be denied on any level. Right. And I just thought it was so cool that he is a lawyer and activist, but yes, also a dancer. Much like you know, you were introduced as an author and an activist, but you're also a dancer. And I just think that that's amazing to be that kind of a multi-hyphenate, because I don't think we really can find that many black gay lawyers in America that are like, yeah, I'm a lawyer, activist, and I am a ballroom, you know, celebrity as well.
I write books. I have a reputation in the immigrant space, both in DC and nationally. But I also believe that we have been imprisoned by culture. Traditions makes us think that what we are doing is right, even though, quote unquote, it's not the right thing to do. And in the vein of following traditions, we miss out from being able to experience what life presents to us. Before we go, I just want to make mention of Deji, because I think it's a very important character too. I was an asylum seeker, and I work for an organization that provides services for refugees and asylum seekers. In America, the African-American community do not have a relationship with black immigrants, which is very bad. Because if a European immigrant come to America, they are absorbed into the white European community. Africans come here. We are African Americans because we are hyphenated, African American. But people here are blacks. They don't absorb Africans that come here. It makes it difficult for us to resettle into what society are for us. If Deji didn't find Michael, what would he have done? Many of you might not know my backstory. I was homeless for some time. I stayed on the streets of America. I didn't find a community that was accepting of who I am. As a black person, me and you, we walk on the streets. A white person cannot distinguish if I'm African and if you're black. So they're like, they are black people. But the black community picks himself on each other and like distinctly African, blacks. You have to have the blood of the ancestors of slaves for you to claim being black in America. But I don't think that that is how we should do it. When you see your brother somewhere, if you come to Africa, you have been to Ghana, they're like, oh my God, you're American, oh my God. But they see their sister there, you're black. So I think that is how we should think about race when it comes to Africans and African Americans.
I agree. I think that there's also, though, this legacy of, and we've all heard it before, Africans come to America and think that they are better than us because they were not enslaved. There is, and this could maybe just be from elites, because I know a lot of very fancy African people, and they will lord over you. I've had experience where they lord over you about, well, you know, my servants, my mansion, my, you know, Oxford education, then I come to America and I went to Harvard. And so I think that there sometimes is this disconnect there. And I would be interested to hear from you how you think that we can kind of, you know, kind of sever that.
It's simple. Whose responsibility to educate the Africans that migrate here is the blacks. So if you never told me your ancestors were slaves, how would I know that we have similarity? My ancestors were colonized by the whites. It's a form of slavery.
Yes, of course.
We're colonized on our own land. So we still have the lineage of slavery because the African Americans migrated from Africa. Maybe your great-great-great-grandparents and mine we're from the same generation. We never can tell. But the only way we can solve that issue of like Africans thinking that they are better than African Americans is to educate them that my parents did not have opportunity to have an education like a white person. And that is why I'm not able to have the privileges they have. They own lands, they have businesses, they went to school. We didn't have that. Except there is a talk and education, there can be no sympathy. And we will continue to think, they think like that, or they think like that, but we have never had that conversation. If I'm with a Nigerian that is telling me that, oh, a black person in New York City is poor compared to a white person, I'm like, go to Kentucky. The poor people there are white.
Yeah.
But because New York City, majority of your neighborhood is black people, the rich people here are black, the poor people here are black. So I think that we need more education and conversations like this to come to an understanding of who is privileged.
Yes.
All black people in America are not privileged because privilege is power. So I don't think that a black person should tell another black person that they are better than each other.
Amen. Thank you. I wanted to bring up the fact that you have a book coming out.
Yeah.
And also you have a wedding coming up.
Yeah.
It's very exciting as well.
Thank you.
But one of the things that was really kind of struck Giselle and I when we were back there, and you were saying that, yes, you're getting married, but your mom won't be able to come. And because if she comes to your wedding, then she is aiding and abetting a criminal. And so she can be prosecuted when she goes back to Nigeria.
She could spend 10 years imprisonment for aiding and abetting. The law criminalizes same-sex marriage, 14 years imprisonment, activists, 10 years imprisonment, organizations that support activists, 10 years imprisonment. Giselle and Neka could be criminalized for promoting a documentary like this. So it's a difficult country to live in. But, you know, if you are giving lemon, you make lemonades out of it. So I can't regret the fact that I can't go back to my country because I love being in America, meeting people, I could express myself. So what can I say?
Yeah.
Making my lemonades.
Yes, indeed. And Giselle, you made a beautiful work of art that really does showcase a problem that I think so many people weren't aware of. And what can we do to help our brothers and sisters that are in Nigeria? You know, I mentioned to you I was supposed to go to Uganda, and based on their really oppressive anti-gay laws, I declined to go. And someone said to me, but you should go because then you can highlight it. So I was kind of torn, but what's your take on it? How can we help here in America?
Well, there are a couple of different ways and approaches to answering that question. And Adafe, I think you could speak to the point of activism. But I also just want to say that this film highlights so many creative, just geniuses, and that have their own music careers, designers, all kinds of people. And I think promoting and looking into those people, finding them, following them, buying their work is important to elevate their voice, one. And then, Adafe, do you want to talk about, and then also we've partnered with Rainbow Railroad and Michael's organization to make sure that there are funds for the community and for anybody who's participated in the film. So also, if you would like to contribute to the cause on the ground in Nigeria, please go to, it's Rainbow Railroad / the Legend of the Underground, and you can find some more information about how to help.
Thank you so much. They're wrapping us.
Okay.
But thank you so much, Giselle and Adafe.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for
Thanks,
Legends
Debbie.
of the Underground. Important work. Thank you. And thank you for joining us in conversation.